Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist congregation of Terre, Haute. This congregation welcomes all people, regardless of their age, religion, race, nationality, ability, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or anything else that has been used to divide people. We are a group of people with our own opinions, our own ideas, our own dreams. But we share ideals. We share a common belief in a liberal religion. In our discussions, we may disagree with each other, but we must always remember that what unites us is stronger than what separates us. We must always end the service aware of the love that we have for each other.
On Being You, today we celebrate the fifth principle. In our religious lives, the democratic process requires trust in the development of each individual conscience, a belief that such development is possible for each of us, as well as a commitment to cultivate our own conscience. We could call it a commitment to the value of each person. In the words of Theodore Parker, democracy means not, I am as good as you are, but you are as good as I am. My connection with the sacred is only as precious as my willingness to acknowledge the same connection in others. The words of Reverend Parissa Parsa, Executive Director of the Public Conservations Project. Today's opening words are number 429. Come into this place of peace, and let its silence heal your spirit. Come into this place of memory, and let its history warm your soul. Come into this place of prophecy and power, and let its vision change your heart. William F. Schultz. And our opening hymn, number 1. Today's transitional words are number 445. The womb of the stars embraces us. Remnants of their fiery furnaces pulse through our veins.
We are of the stars, the dust of the explosions cast across space.
We are of the earth, We breathe and live in the breath of ancient plants and beasts.
Their cells nourish the soil. We build our communities on their harvest of gifts.
Our fingers trace the curves carved in clay and stone by forebears unknown to us.
We are a part of the great circle of humanity gathered around the fire, the hearth, the altar.
We gather anew this day to celebrate our common heritage.
May we recall in gratitude all that has given us birth.
Joy Atkinson. Today's minister is Bill Breeden, who I believe needs no introduction in this congregation.
Well, it's good to be back here in Terre Haute with you all. I think you're doing a good job of dealing with this COVID. It's good to see some people in the congregation and respecting social distances and wearing masks and being wise. When I sent in the title for today's service, I really wasn't sure what I was going to do. It's been a rather crazy time in my life, as you know. If you follow I don't know how many follow my Facebook pages. I want to begin, by the way, with a mea culpa. Just yesterday, sometimes Facebook, we screw up. That's just all there is to it. Sometimes something grabs your eyes and you post it and you don't think deeply enough about it. And late last night, I happened to do that and got a couple of phone messages this morning say, that kind of thing. So I looked at it again. And I'll just explain the picture to you. The picture is a picture of an interracial family, a white woman, a black man, and a small child. And they're wearing three T-shirts. The black man is wearing a T-shirt that says White Lives Matter. The white woman is wearing a T-shirt that says Black Lives Matter. And the little boy is wearing a T-shirt that says All Lives Matter. And that would be nice if it were true, but it's not true. And I was had a lot of reactions to that, and rightly so. The fact is that family may wear those shirts in order to feel safe in a racist community and going out as an interracial couple. And I can understand that. It was a beautiful picture, they're a beautiful family. But the idea that there is moral equivalence is wrong. That the fact is that all lives do not matter. The fact is, in America, white lives matter a hell of a lot more than any other lives and always have. And though I grew up in a very low-income family, I never had to deal with my life not mattering. And we're in a new day in this age, a day of awakening. And sometimes in my geriatric fog, I miss things. And so I posted an apology, and I will post a full mea culpa this afternoon, because I want people to understand that though we make mistakes, it is important to own up to them. And so if you saw that post and you saw some reactions to it, I hope that you will jump on the bandwagon and agree that the family is beautiful, the message is wrong. So it's been a crazy month for me. As you may or may not have read on my Facebook post, the article that's in the, what's the name of that? Do you remember the name of the website or the newspaper? I can't. I'll think of it here in a minute. It'll come to me. What's that? Yeah, Intercept. The Intercept. Juliana Segura writes for it, and she was at several of the executions this last year with me. Outside, we spend a lot of hours at the dollar store, more than I ever wanted to spend at a dollar store. And I will tell you that the owner or the managers of the dollar store, for the most part, were very polite, and we tried to respect their parking spaces and be good neighbors. If you do not know, we started those execution watch vigils last July when the Trump Bar Murder Incorporated began killing people in Terre Haute. I was there for all the executions with the exception of two when I injured my leg and couldn't walk. But there were people there for everyone protesting, sometimes a larger group and sometimes just one. But thank goodness that's over. Virginia has now become the first state to abolish the death penalty. I think the governor will sign it, I'm fairly sure, and the first southern state to abolish the death penalty. And I think we're going to see more and more states do that. Part of it's economic, to be honest with you. It just simply cost counties too much to have capital trials anymore, so very few capital cases are charged. And the other thing is that, as I've always said about support for the death penalty, it's 3 miles wide and a half inch deep. When people find out what the death penalty, how it's executed, and the racist manner in which it's executed, the support begins to slow. And support for the death penalty right now is lower than it has been in many, many decades. So to begin with, I want to do a couple of things. One is I spent 30 hours with Corey Johnson in the last 2 weeks of his life. I got on the third to the last execution, or the fourth to the last execution, one of my lawyer friends who's worked with me for years as an abolitionist was there. And as we were leaving at about 1 o'clock in the morning, I asked her to find out if the last three to be executed, Liz Montgomery, Corey Johnson, and Dustin Higgs, had spiritual advisors. Because it is my deepest belief, one of my deepest held beliefs is that one of the most important gifts of life, the most important gift that life has to give us, in my opinion, is to die in the presence of someone who cares for us. I think that's one of the tragedies, the immense tragedies of violent deaths, of war, although even in war, many times soldiers are surrounded by their comrades who care. So I think every person deserves to have someone with them when they die who cares for them. And so she checked, and it's something I never wanted to do, but she came back and said, Corey Johnson does not have one, and I volunteered to be his spiritual advisor. He spent 29 years in solitary confinement without a visitor, except for his legal team, which occasionally legal lawyers early on only come around maybe once a year, but then once the appeals and your times come on, they come around more often. But not a single family visitor, not a single friend, no one. For 29 years he sat in a 6x8 cell with a very small window that's tinted black, very difficult to see out of. And so when I heard that his lawyer actually found out that I was willing to do this, and a wonderful lawyer out of Washington, D.C., and he went to see Corey, and he said, look, I think it'd be a good idea if you had a minister who would go in the death chamber with you. He said, I can't do that. They won't allow lawyers. You have to be a minister. Well, when Corey went into death row, you fill out a paper when you go into prison on your religious affiliation, your religious preference, and that way they can get you a minister if you want one. And he had put none. He had no religion. And so his lawyer said, the only thing you have to do is get that paper back from the chaplain and fill out a new one and say Unitarian. And this is a guy who's been in solitary confinement for 29 years, who is developmentally challenged in terms of being able to read and write very well, but he had the integrity and the honesty of a child. And he said to his lawyer, I can't do that. The lawyer said, why? He said, well, it'd be a lie. I don't even know what a Unitarian is. A lot of people don't. And his lawyer said, look, this is just a piece of paper. A government that's trying to kill you, you can tell them you're a Unitarian. And he badgered Corey so much that Corey later told me, he said I was kind of forced into doing this by my lawyer, that he got the paper back, signed it, and because I'm already a minister of record, I didn't have to go through a long process and was allowed to become Corey's minister within a few days. And I began to spend time with him about 6 hours, 5 to 6 hours at a time for 5 visits, the last of which was on the morning of his execution. And I tell you, I found a man that was remarkable. I didn't know. If you've ever read Dracula or seen the movie, you remember Renfield, who's catching flies? I thought, what am I going to see? What am I going to run into here? 29 years of solitary confinement. And I found a remarkable man. When he was sentenced to death in Richmond, Virginia, it so happened on that day, and Corey was 20 years old. It so happened on that day that there was a black middle school who brought a classroom of kids to observe in the court. I don't think the judge knew they were going to be there. I don't think anybody knew that it was going to be a death sentence, or surely they wouldn't have brought the kids in. But they were there. And when Corey was sentenced to death, the judge asked him if he had anything to say. And this is a man of limited ability, but amazing integrity. Even then, he said, I want to speak to the children. And he turned to the children and he said to them, I've done terrible things in my life. Don't follow my path, because this is where it ends up. To have the integrity to do that when someone has just condemned you to death. And there's actually television footage of a news crew that happened to be there that day, I think because of the death sentence coming on, and interviewed these black kids as they came out of the courtroom, and several of the kids said, that black man in there that was sentenced to death, he's black like we are. We listened to him. Here is a man who, as he says, and I want to read to you his final words, which I was not allowed to read in the death chamber. The people who were doing the execution wouldn't allow me to. They said he had to read it himself. He's a very poor reader, and he's strapped down on a cross-shaped gurney, unable to hold a paper, and they wouldn't let me come close enough to hold it for him anyway. And so they refused to let me give his last words. Had they done so, the victims' families, I believe, would have found more healing and more closure in these words than they did in the execution to which they cheered, whistled, and clapped. The last words of Corey Johnson. I want to say that I am sorry for my crimes. I wanted to say that to the families who were victimized by my actions, and I want to say these names to be remembered. Lisa Johnson, Anthony Carter, Dorothy Armstrong, Curtis Thorne, Linwood Childs, Peyton Johnson, and Bobby Long, his victims. I would have said I was sorry before, but I didn't know how. I hope you will find peace. To my family, I have always loved you, and your love has made me real. On the streets, I was looking for shortcuts. I had some good role models. I was sidetracking. I was blind and stupid. I am not the same man that I was. To the staff at the SCU, that's Death Row Special Security Unit, thank you. You have been kind. The pizza and strawberry shake were wonderful, but I didn't get the jelly-filled donuts that I ordered. What's with that? That should be fixed. Thanks to my legal team, they have been more than lawyers, they have become friends. Thanks to the chaplain who has been kind, and I'm thankful for my minister. I'm okay. I'm at peace. Jelly-filled donuts. I mean, you can't find jelly-filled donuts in Terre Haute, for crying out loud. You know, he didn't ask for a T-bone steak, pizza, strawberry shake, and jelly-filled donuts. And you got donut holes. What a thing. So I shared that with you because I committed, when I visited Corey one day, I took the book in, Velveteen Rabbit, which is, I think, the most important book in my library. And I give it to everybody, and if you have children or grandchildren, if they don't have it, get it for them. In that book, it talks about the rabbit in the nursery gets forgotten after a while, then a little boy grows up, and the rabbit's been all worn off. He used to be loved when the boy was a baby and a child, and his hair's all rubbed off and so forth. And he asked a skin horse, the oldest member of the nursery toys, he said, what's it mean to be real? Does it mean having things that stick out and keys that wind up and move and shoot guns and things like that? And skin horse finally says, no, that has nothing to do with real. Being real, you become real when someone loves you for a long, long time. That's what makes you real. That's why it doesn't happen It doesn't happen to people that have to be carefully kept, to things that have to be set on shelves and carefully kept. It doesn't happen to prickly things that can't be touched. It happens to those who can be loved. And I tell you, even though Corey's family had never been able to visit because the expense of coming to Terre Haute and visiting is high, they had loved him all those 29 years. And Corey knew that he was real. When I talk about the directions we should go, I've been struggling with folks who are trying to convince me that the COVID is a hoax, that it's all, that the pandemic is not really real, that it's all big pharma and it's all a conspiracy. And some people who I respect greatly have been trying to convince me of this. I believe in science. I really do. And I don't think science is all a conspiracy. I think science works. I think, Jonas Salk, go back through the history of vaccines, they've worked very well across decades and centuries. So I believe in science, but I also want to say, I believe in faith. I believe without faith, science ends up in death chambers. We can find nice, clean, clinical ways to kill people, but without faith, without at least a spirituality, and not necessarily a religion, but a spiritual understanding of life, science can be deadly. And we need to understand that. Frederick Lewis Donaldson wrote in a sermon in Westminster Abbey in London on March 20th, 1925. The 7 social sins are wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, knowledge without character, commerce without morality, science without humanity, worship without sacrifice, and politics without principle. I think we have seen all of those 7 social sins greatly exaggerated in the last few years. Isaac Asimov says the saddest aspect of life right now is that science gathers knowledge faster than society gathers wisdom. And then Martin Luther King said, science investigates, religion interprets. Science gives man knowledge, which is power. Religion gives man wisdom, which is control. Science deals mainly with facts. Religion deals mainly with values. The two are not rivals. Though I hesitate to use the word religion and all that, I agree with him quite deeply that without a faith, without some spiritual understanding of our lives, science becomes deadly. Einstein said, science without religion is lame, religion without science is blind. And then he also said, 2 things are infinite, the universe and human stupidity. And I'm not sure about the universe. We can only, one of the things that I share with many prisoners, I did a live interview for 2 hours the other day with lifers in the Sterling, Colorado prison. It's done through Denver University. A professor there, a young professor, called me and asked me to take part in this program. It's a theater program at the prison. Thank goodness they have that in Colorado. I hope one of these days we can get that back in Indiana and some educational programs. We seem to have very little right now. But I met with 2 lifers who are playwrights and are working on things, and they wanted to interview me, and we spent 2 hours sharing different things. It was an amazing conversation. And one of the things that they asked me is, how do I deal with this whole idea of, how do I do not hate, how I do not worry all the time that the world's going to fall in, collapse on us all, and everything's going to fall apart. And I said to them what I've said to you before, that I can only live one breath at a time. One breath at a time. And all of us here today, and those who will watch this later, we have this rather absurd security about our lives. We think we have things planned out. We think we have things together. We have retirement plans, IRAs. We have all these things set up. We have houses that we live in. And the fact is, we still only live one breath at a time. The fact is, you could walk out today and die in the next breath. It's just a fact of life. And so for me, as I have said to you and I said to them, I focus on that one breath. It's the only breath I own, and I have to give it back. And how I give it back makes all the difference in the world. And I can give it back hating someone. I could have given it back hating the guys in the execution room. I was devastated when I walked in and they refused to allow me to read Corey's words. And what can you do? They drew a blue line there and said, you have to stand right there and don't cross that line. And I looked at Corey, and I know that he wanted the victim's family to hear those words. The curtains weren't up yet. Everything was closed down. And so they told me I could say my prayer. Well, I became a minister not only to Corey, but to his family. And I wanted to be a minister to the victim's family as well. The calling of ministry is to bind up the brokenhearted. The calling of ministry is to care for those who are suffering. That's what I was there for. And yet this man was telling me, nobody will hear you. You say your prayer, you read your psalm, that's all you get to do. I told him also that I wanted to bless his body after he died. So I said my prayer, and I don't even know what I said. I was so frustrated that who knows what I said. I read the psalm that he liked the best. I looked to the hills, which is my refuge. 91st, I think. And then I stood there for quite some time as they waited and waited. And finally, there were 3 executioners in the room. The warden at Terre Haute does not allow his people to take part in executions. I appreciate that. Because people, you spend 29 years going by a man's cell, handing him his food, doing whatever, handcuffing him and bringing him out. You get to know people. And the warden here knows that he didn't want his people to have to do this. And I will tell you, Corey, by all accounts, both staff and residents of death row, was the calmest person they'd ever seen. He never had fights with anybody, never raised his voice in 29 years of solitary. One of the oldest, been on solitary longer than almost anyone. So these 3 people are brought in from outside. And when it comes time for the execution, I wish I tell people this, if we're going to kill people, every television set in America should play nothing but the execution when it happens. Every American ought to have to watch it. We ought to have to see what they are doing with our tax dollars. And no other broadcast should be allowed except the execution. But finally, the man in the other corner talked on the phone, hung it up, and said, no impediments. No impediments. In other words, the Supreme Court had said go with it. And the man standing next to Corey took off his mask and began to holler. And I can't holler as loud as he did. What a voice. Literally hollered at the top of his lungs. The curtains are raised. The news media is in the center room. Corey's family is to my left, and over in a darkened window sits the victim's family, which we cannot see. Corey knew, and I told him to look to his left to see his family. He yelled out the sentencing of what Corey had done. He yelled out the death sentence. He yelled out that there are no impediments and let the execution begin. As it began a few minutes later, Corey said, my mouth and hands are burning. And I stood there helpless. We're not made to do this, We're not made to stand and watch someone you love die and not die, be murdered. I've helped a lot of people prepare to die. It's the first time I've ever helped somebody prepare to be murdered and then stood there and watched it happen. It took 25 minutes for him to die. But the redeeming thing about it was Over in this room over here, James was Corey's brother. I hadn't seen him in 29 years. He's hollering for 25 minutes, "I love you, bro, I love you, bro." And even though it's supposed to be a soundproof room, you could hear it and Corey could hear it. "I love you, bro," and he never stopped for 25 minutes. Corey died with people who cared for him, around him, and one man in the room. I blessed Corey's body. It's the first time I got to touch him was after he was dead. Corey had COVID. I blessed his body. I said in that blessing, "Here is the body of a man who claimed that he had accomplished nothing, but in death may have accomplished something, because on the day before and on the day of Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, we are killing 2 black men. And this may wake up America. So, Corey, you may have done something." After I was finished, I could not help myself. I turned to the 3 men, executioners, and I said, "I would be remiss as my role as minister if I did not advise you to find another line of employment before you lose your soul." And the lead executioner, who had been yelling, came over to me yelling in my face without a mask, and I was masked, thankful, and telling me how they're here to keep all the other employees here not to have to do this. And I wanted to say to him, "Have you ever read Thomas Merton that says the most essential element of being human is to have the freedom to say your own yes and your own no?" I wanted to say, you can say your own yes and your own no. And Helen Prejean, Sister Helen Prejean, a friend of mine and a great abolitionist, has called for the Union of Correctional Workers to require that their members refuse to take part in death penalties, in executions. So I do not quickly write it off and say it was just their duty, because it was just the duties of the guard at Auschwitz too. And we need to understand that murder is murder, regardless of who does it. Science without humanity. That's what we had in that death chamber. I believe very strongly that we can come together in the science and religion thing. You know, they're not rivals, as Martin Luther King said. They are both tools of the human expression. They are both things that we can do. Carl Sagan said, "Science is not only compatible with spirituality, it is a profound source of spirituality. When we recognize our place in an immensity of light years and the passage of ages, when we grasp the intricacy, beauty, and subtlety of life, then that soaring feeling, that sense of elation and humility combined is surely spiritual. So are our emotions in the presence of great art or music or literature, or acts of exemplary, selfless courage such as those of Gandhi, Martin Luther King. The notion that science and spirituality are somehow mutually exclusive does a disservice to both. Science, hopefully, continually asks questions, is this correct? Continually corrects itself. Religion has a problem doing that. One time a student says, "Dr. Einstein, aren't these the same questions as last year's physics exam, final exam?" Einstein said, "Yes, but this year the answers are different." It's important to understand that's the nature of science. It's not certainty. It's what if. It's what is. It's what changes as we go along. The warning from Voltaire, I think, is something that I also kept reminding myself throughout these 30 hours with Corey Johnson, and in looking at the faces of the executioners, when he said, "Truly, whoever can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities." Whoever can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. We saw it on January 6th. We really did. That's exactly what happened. People believing absurdities committed atrocities. And we've seen that for 4 years. And, we've seen it in lesser measure in other presidencies. Don't get me wrong. I think, we've got a long way to go in this so-called democracy. But I do want to say that it's easier to breathe after January 20th. It really is. I breathed easier when I got up on January 20th, and we did have a transfer of power. And I will not let President Biden off the hook. I've protested every single president since Jimmy Carter. Before that, I was on the other side of the fence. I didn't really, I was as Republican as you could get, to be honest with you, and as conservative as you could get, fundamentalist, evangelical, believing that I knew everything there was to know, and that was primarily how to get to heaven. And some of you, my story of how that changed. But I've protested every president since Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter had the wisdom to issue an order not to arrest anyone on the day they reinstated the military draft, which is what me and 5 women chained ourselves up in the Kansas City post office for, expecting to be arrested. And people did it all across the country. But Carter was probably the most intelligent president in our history, and he said, let them sit there till the post office closes, and we did. So I will continue to protest, and I will continue to hold Biden's feet to the fire to realize the dream of not a perfect union, but at least a more democratic union than we have had. I hope we all begin every day with a question mark and understand that we might not be right. We might make mistakes. The Unitarian Universalist may not be the secret for everybody. I hope we all wake up every day with this dichotomy of a strong spiritual faith that love is greater than hate, that love can overcome almost anything. I think it can. And also a belief that science can help us live better lives. They're wedded together. They're part of who we are. Stephen Hawking wrote, 1, remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet. 2, never give up work. Work gives you meaning and purpose, and life is empty without it. 3, if you are lucky enough to find love, remember it is there and don't throw it away. Corey Johnson found love. He was an amazing guy. I want to thank Dottie and Sylvia, by the way, for providing some housing for Corey's brother and his wife for several days. They were very appreciative. But we raised funds to bring their families, his family, into Terre to see him for the first time in 29 years. And the beautiful thing, even better, was I told Corey about the old Native African, indigenous Africans' religion. Say, you do not die until your name is forgotten. You don't die in this world, and you don't die in the next world until your name is forgotten. When your name is forgotten, you die in both worlds. That's the heart of most African religions. And so I told him, we will remember your name, Corey. We will remember your name. So I've started a project, and it's not official yet, but I just went on Facebook and asked for help raising funds to bring their family here, the family of Corey Johnson, because the government pays the victim's family to come. And I raised, in about 3 days, over $7,000. It was amazing, from all over the country. And every one of them said, we will remember Corey Johnson's name. So I'm starting a project called the Corey Johnson Project because the legal team decided to pick up all of those expenses and pay for everything for the family of Corey Johnson, which leaves me with $7,000 for a project. And what we're trying to do, what we will be doing, is to find out which prisoners on death row's families can, because there's very few families visit death row. And when they do, it's a long time apart. And when they do, it's usually preceding an execution. And so what we're going to try to do is set up a project called the Corey Johnson Project and help families come visit their men on death row. So I appreciate being here this morning. It's not really what I really didn't know what I was going to do today. But it was good to share with you. I will tell you that there is a sense, I believe very seriously, strongly now, that grief is like a stranger. It comes into your house when you're eating dinner, or sits down in your car when you're sitting at a red light and you hadn't seen him for a long time, and all of a sudden, bam, there it is again. You're crying so hard you can't leave the red light. Cars are honking and you can't see the lights. Or it ruins your supper when you're getting ready to eat. That's what grief does. But after a while, grief becomes a witness to the depth of your love. And in 30 hours, Corey Johnson carved some things in my heart that I may not find for another year or two. It may be down the road, and it has happened many times since the execution, that someone will call me and I'll have to hang up. They'll ask me a question and it hits the wrong place. And I remember Corey and I say, I can't talk to you. That's what grief does to us. But grief becomes a friend when it reminds you of how deeply you loved. And in 30 hours, Corey and I became lovers. Never got to touch him, but I really respected the man, a remarkable human being. And I was honored to be his minister in the last 2 weeks of his life. I will tell you that my other person on death row that I visit has COVID. There's COVID all over the prison now. And I will be seeing him again the first of next month. He is now a member of our Unitarian Church in Bloomington, Indiana, as is Philip Stroud, a man serving 3 life sentences in Pendleton, Indiana. We're trying to make contacts with prisoners, and as we do, we have another member of our church in Bloomington who I got certified as a minister of record and is serving a man on death row here in Terre, Haute, and his man is also probably going to become a member of our church. It's really an honor to have them as members. They never heard of Unitarian Universalism. When we learn about it, they say, this is what I want to be. It's what I am. And so we're trying to make those kind of connections and be more than happy to help anyone here who would like to be connected in that way. And there may come a time when I will ask you if you want to have a prisoner be a member of your congregation. Chad Folks, my man there, when he got his certificate that we made up, a member of our church, he posted it right inside his cell door. He said, it's the best thing on my wall. We believe in changing the world. And I believe that every time you love, you change the world. You make it a better place. And I encourage you to do so. Let us sing our closing hymn, With Joy We Claim the Growing Light, number 345.
With joy we claim the growing light, advancing thought and widening view, the larger freedom, clearer sight, which from the old unfold the new. With wider view come loftier goal, with fuller light more good to see, with freedom truer self-control, with knowledge deeper reverence be.
Our closing words are number 681. Deep peace of the running wave to you, deep peace of the flowing air to you, deep peace of the quiet earth to you, deep peace of the shining stars to you, deep peace of infinite grace, peace to you.
May the blessings of love rest upon you. May peace abide with you. May God's presence illuminate your heart now and forevermore.
Go in peace. Know that you are loved and that your life is sacred.